Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Tribe Talk, Sunday, October 25th, 2020. We're at it again. Glad to see you all here tonight. Really thought that tonight I would just kind of be a little bit more relaxed and cover some of the research that I presented to the International Motorcycle Conference in Germany, except we'll take some time and walk through the slides, and that way if anybody has any questions, we'll get to them. The tribe is a group of like-minded people. We certainly have more in common than we do have differences, and this is an opportunity for us to dialogue a little bit, talk, communicate, and see if we can share our experiences and ideas for the betterment of the tribe, the people that we most like, people like us. This is an independent event, not sponsored by anyone, regardless of who shows up, who participates. The one important thing that we're doing is trying to improve the tribe, and we can only do that if we communicate to each other. Tribe talk etiquette. I don't see but maybe one new person in here tonight. So I won't cover them in depth other than if we do have technical difficulties, because I'll be switching back and forth through slides tonight. Please try to get back on. And if I have a technical difficulty, I've assigned a co-host, and they'll keep things going until I can get back on. Lurkers are welcome. Invite your friends. We're going to be on for about an hour tonight. So once again, covering what the research that I presented at IFZ, the comparison of instructor candidate selections in the United States. We'll have our weekly, actually that turns into monthly now, I guess I'll have to change that, poll just to see where our knowledge base is. And then I wanted to highlight again that Tuesday will be a VRETS by MSF, that if you have the opportunity to get into, it'll be pretty cool, as it is every time we get to hear Dr. Ray talk. So without further ado, let me stop this share and let me jump into the next share. Can everybody see that okay?
Yes, sir.
All right, good. I just wanted to briefly go over this, that I presented this to the Institute for Two-Wheel Motorcycles in Germany. It was a great pleasure to be able to do that. You know, it's just kind of nice to have such opportunities. So certainly as rider coaches, sometimes we're put into positions where we can share what we love, and I advocate for you to try to do that at any time, because it helps us all in the long run. Let me see if I can get this to change. Just a quick overview, not going to go into this much, but I will say that I'll be giving a few definitions in the next couple slides that may help to clarify stuff. And believe it or not, even since I've done this research, it seems it has taken me in a different direction. And at the end, I'll pose some questions to see what you think and cover some of that material as well. This is the problem and the purpose that I came up for the research. Basically, because the one thing I hear, no matter where I have gone and coached or been a trainer at, is that we need to do a better job of selecting who our rider coaches are, who our candidates are, and how that relates or ties into the information that is gained for the student. Now, I will caveat all of this with saying that the students will learn despite us. I think Jeff Way said that a couple weeks ago, and it's so true that when we're using good adult learning techniques, students will continue to learn. It's natural for humans to be that way. However, what I will say is that if you have the wrong instructor or the wrong rider coach, sometimes bad things can happen, or maybe not necessarily bad things, but we potentially pass on the wrong information. And anytime we pass on the wrong information or go in a way that doesn't benefit what the curriculum is trying to get across, there's a certain danger there. So it's important to keep that in mind. So it's good to have a theoretical foundation in research and to understand where information come from and possibly why you will use that information. In this particular research, I really stuck heavily with these three individuals, Piaget, Bandura, and Knowles. And the reason that I did was because each of these former really brilliant men had emphasized the human factor. And if you haven't touched on this much as a rider coach or in your life, the bottom line is we can do whatever we want to, but there's always a human factor that can either enhance or degrade what we're trying to do. In rider education, we want to give the most beneficial learning environment for our students. And the only way that we can do that is to use what we know about the human element, how we make connections with others to pass that information on. And adult and accelerated learning capabilities are kind of expected in our profession, and it helps to create an environment, and it's a characteristic of a job. So these three people and what they talk about was really important to me in developing the research. And that's why, that's where the theoretical foundation came from. I'm going to hit a bit on some of the key literature, and I will tell you that there's probably 10 times this amount of literature that was gone through for the research, but this is kind of a thread that follows all the way through. A couple things I'd like to say, though, is that in this research, there doesn't seem to be enough. We don't do enough research to see how well we're doing currently, how well we have done in the past, and things that we could change for the future. When you compare us to other countries, and that's the one thing I wanted to hit upon here, the Netherlands, France, Australia, the UK, we don't do very much research here. And that's kind of sad. There could be much more done. And I think that in the future, if we don't do more research, then we won't be able to explain why we do these things and why they're important. Of important note, if you've been around the Tribe Talk Happy Hour in the last month or so, there's a man named Duncan McCrae that has shown up and given us some insight. If you look down at the bottom under Sensoric there, 2017, he was a co-researcher on that research and part of the literature that I took into consideration when I was doing this. So I'll let you read the definitions that I just put up. We've already talked a little bit about human factors. Emotional intelligence seems to be what I was focused on most at the end of this. And really, it wasn't me focusing on emotional intelligence. It was the people I talked to that brought me to that assumption that emotional intelligence was kind of important. You'll also see down there instructor job fit and instructor organizational fit, which are really important within this research. I quickly hit upon the standards we have in the United States, and we've talked about this before. I don't know if in Tribe Talk, but certainly in Tribe Talk Happy Hour, that these are the qualifications that NHTSA, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, Transportation Safety Administration, has kind of laid out there for us and as our standards for state motorcycle rider training programs. And I'll ask the question once again, which one of these bullets down there say that we have to have a good instructor? And that is not rhetorical. That's the actual question of everybody.
Well, it looks like the last one.
Only the last one. Successfully complete an instructor preparation and certification program. Does it say what that instructor preparation or certification program has to have in it to prove that they are a good instructor?
That's
And
pretty broad.
regardless of what it says in it, does completing a instructor prep necessarily make someone a good instructor?
It's a great question. And that's why this really sticks in my crawl a little bit. If my preparation and certification program is run by somebody who doesn't care, somebody who says, yeah, I just want to make you an instructor, and now I certify you by my curriculum, does that meet a good standard for success?
It's not a guarantee.
It's not a guarantee. And so the only way we can improve this is to raise the level of the standard. I believe, and this is just Don's opinion, so take it for what it's worth. The standards were created to encompass everybody in the United States at one time. And when you do that with so many varying policies, procedures, laws, regulations, statutes, and codes in every state, it becomes very difficult to put down on a piece of paper what a good standard would be, especially when you're just starting a standard. I suspect, though, that maybe the standard over time should improve and should be better. And so that's the whole reason for this slide, was just to kind of get people into that frame of mind that maybe we need to do a little bit more to increase the standard. So these were the 3 research questions that I came up with. How do we vet and identify potential candidates? What characteristics and attributes of candidates do we want for a good instructor in rider education? And what is the measure at the completion of the selection process that tells us that person is the right person before we spend time and money and resources on them? It's really a simple question, but then it's not. Anybody that has worked in human resources in the past know that it's not that easy to predict how somebody is going to behave at work, and what work they're going to put forth and how long they're going to stay there. However, there have been a lot of human resource and human behavior and organizational behavior information over the years that can give you a pretty good idea of the direction to go. And maybe we should consider some of that stuff in our future. So I use an explorative methodology. This means very little other than, this is kind of an opening of a book. I'm just getting into finding out what could be done and what could be done better. So I used themes that I received from asking questions of program managers, program administrators here in the United States, and from instructor trainers. And the way I did that was I scheduled 30-minute interviews. We had great discussions. It was semi-structured, meaning I had lots of questions that I gave everybody in that 30 minutes. But I also had a little flexibility that when I heard something, I could ask deeper questions if necessary, kind of like facilitating in the class. And then after all that information was changed into code, I looked for themes in what people said. common themes, not necessarily the same words, but of the same thought process or the same information so that I could turn it into something we could use.
The inclusion criteria of the two compared populations was program managers and instructor trainers ages 30 to 65 with instructor trainer
You can't hear that, can you?
greater or
You can?
Yes, we do.
5 years.
All right. Didn't mean to do
An
that.
interesting
Tried to.
finding was that approximately 33%
I hear it, but I can't understand it.
had enough motorcycle rider education
Make it stop.
and knowledge to participate, while 66% did not. Because of privacy, it was difficult to determine the eligibility of all the instructor trainers to participate. Of the 30 respondents, 8 participated and met the research criteria. Many potential respondents over the age of 65 voiced some concern for not being included, feeling their knowledge was excluded in the study. This was a decisional shortcoming in the original selection of a population, as some of the managers and trainers in the two populations served in positions well beyond normal retirement age. It is important to note that both the program manager and instructor trainer populations are paid for working in this field and volunteered for this research without compensation. Although a wide range of volunteers was pursued, protocols for informed consent and anonymity were followed. 24 states were represented, almost half the United States geographical area.
I apologize for that. Let me see if I can kind of encapsulate some of what is being said on here. Bottom line is I should have opened it up to people higher than age 65, but I had to constrain it somewhat. Interestingly, of all the administrators in the United States, only about 20% met the selection criteria, meaning that they had been in writer's education over 5 years. They were writer coach and writer coach trainer certified. And if you look at the latest NHTSA document, the 2019 5-year plan, they reinforce this information, saying that only 20% of program administrators in the United States have a background in writer's education, meaning they know how to coach, they've been out there and they've done that. And I thought that was a significant finding. It's also important that, you know, I contacted by email 184 of the 214 writer coach trainers, and only 30 responded. Of those 30, only 8 participated. And that says a lot about, you know, our trainers in the United States. And I'll let you ask questions if you would like on that. 3 industry manufacturers were represented in the population, and 2 different distinct curriculums were represented. So I did not only go with the MSF curriculum. Tried to get more, could not. People would not participate. Any questions on this slide now that you've had to listen to it? Good. So I'm going to quickly go over 3 of the research questions. And what you'll notice here is that the box at the top is the question. So in this particular case, describe the criteria and vetting processes used to identify potential instructor candidates. In the boxes below are the actual quotes, some of the actual quotes that best represented the themes from everybody who participated. And so you can see on the blue one, it was a program manager, myself with the support of my administrative team, vet the applications for whatever they're vetting it for. And then on the other side is an instructor trainer. The state has no requirements at all. Actually has no requirements other than they recommend candidates are interviewed. A recommendation, not an absolute. I've gradually learned what I need to look for in things actually to listen for. So you can see two extremes here of, programs that are very tight, controlling and managing, and then another program where there really isn't anybody there, that just kind of, this instructor trainer does it on his own. And by the way, will not reveal who these people are, but this particular instructor is a competent, very knowledgeable instructor. And because he had no other guidance, he learned to be a very competent, well thought out instructor and instructor trainer. So just an idea there. What could be the problem between these two types of organizations, where one, pretty much I do what I want to do because that's all I can do, and another one where they have very well written standards and vet candidates really well? What could be the problems there?
Not every square peg fits into a round hole.
Okay. Could it provide us great variance depending upon the program we are associated with as to what kind of instructor or candidate that we put through the process? Okay, a few head nods. I won't belabor this particular slide, and we'll go on to the next one. Same question, but this time I was focusing on interviews, how they do interviews. And I'll let you read those two boxes there. Both of these were program administrators. One says he very rarely does one-on-one interviews. He just accepts any candidate that applies. Where another one says, I'll contact every one of them, interview them at least once, have sponsors, site managers administrate them, and then maybe have a second interview with them. So would interviews be important if you're selecting a candidate?
I think interviews would be very important, because I got an interview myself when I wanted to become an instructor.
Absolutely.
Same here. When I was interested in becoming a rider coach, one of the local RCTs met up with me before I went to RCP or anything, and we sat down and talked for, 20 or 30 minutes at a coffee shop before I was accepted into an RCP.
What kind of feel did you get when you did that?
It was good. It was, they asked, why do you want to do this? And some other question, like one of the questions was, well, what kind of gear do you have? And that's not necessarily, the important thing isn't what kind of helmet do you own or what jacket do you wear, but are you the kind of person who wears gear and is a good representative of motorcycling and would be a good role model in motorcycling?
I would agree. You can find out a lot of people just by, hanging out with them for a little bit. And that's a really great way to do interviews. Hey, let's meet up and talk. Just two motorcyclists.
I was a range aide for a couple of years, and then the site administrator came to me and said, hey, it's time for you to become an instructor. So I actually got my arm twisted.
And that's always good too. You get to know people, and after a while you think, hey, that person would be a good instructor based upon your previous experiences and knowledge. So all things that should be taken into consideration. So this next slide here highlights something very interesting when you compare it to the previous slide. And it's the fact that instructor trainers have different perspectives than the last slide that were program managers. And you can see these are some of the more interesting comments that I received during the interviews that led me to wonder, are program managers and instructor trainers really communicating what's best for programs? So what are your thoughts about the 3 quotes that you see here? Have you
I sure hope
thought
that
these,
isn't my state.
have you thought these before?
I've heard some of those about other states before.
Okay. And by the way, this isn't to throw anybody, any one state, or even, you know, being a rider coach or an instructor trainer under the bus. But these are, you know, actual quotes during interviews. So this is how people feel. And, you know, quite often we don't hear these things in public, but we see them certainly when we're talking one-on-one with people. Has anybody ever heard of the good old boy system? All right, you know, there's a lot of that goes on because, you know, we hang out with our tribe. Isn't that naturally a way that a good old boy system kind of forms?
Actually, that's the one I was referring to when I
Oh,
said
see?
I've heard it about other states.
Ah,
A lot of places, the good old boy network is still going on, even in the rider coach criteria in other places.
sure. So I'll move on to the next slide. And this particular slide talks a little bit about auditing. A lot of places call this shadowing, you know, going out and having a candidate spend some time on the range, be a range aide for a while. But I found great agreement between the program managers and the instructor trainers on this, that auditing is something that was advocated by just about everybody that I interviewed. The problem that seems to be happening with auditing is it's recommended, it's not mandatory. And so many people do not audit. So
I
I'll
think
move on.
auditing would be a very good idea in every place, and a different auditor, different times, a different coach.
I'll kind of hit on that later. It's a good observation, and it is important. In some of the recommendations at the end, I'll discuss that.
Yeah, I was going to say we do that. We also require them to take a BRC as a student. And usually the trainer is kind of the one that teaches that BRC, or at least that's what I've done in the last couple RCPs that I've done. And I actually counseled out a prospective candidate during the BRC just because of the way he was acting or interacting. I kind of knew it wasn't going to be a good fit.
Perfect example of job fit and organizational fit. Not everybody is meant to be a rider coach, even if they are in the good old boy system. Whereas there are other people out there that certainly prove that they should be. When I started talking about characteristics and attributes of candidates, it was amazing how much agreement there was. And everybody knew what they were looking for in a positive candidate, but they didn't know how to measure it. So having the soft skills, the people skills, integrity, honesty, interacting well with others, role models, good character, patience, mentors for students, it all came out pretty much the same with everybody. And you can kind of see here on this slide, it's the same slide, just highlighting those particular words. And one trainer, you can see there, IT02, actually came out and said emotional intelligence, which I thought was rather interesting because I never thought about that holistically until I got into this research. So that one key word there got me to looking a little bit harder at what emotional intelligence was and why it may be important. And what I found is all those other highlighted red words impact or describe somebody with a high or good emotional intelligence. So when it got into the measurement of who had all these characteristics and had all those good qualities that we're looking for in a candidate, it became very difficult to measure. It was almost as if we were looking for words that could not be measured. Which led to action. And action really is the only way we can measure it. And if you don't do a good interview and you don't do auditing, it's hard to know what kind of candidate you have before you go through the certification process. This is just a rehash of some of the things we've already discussed. Multiple interviews. So Dennis mentioned, we should do interviews. Many of the better programs that seem to have it together discussed having multiple interviews, doing an initial interview off of an application, having that person go out and do audits or spend time with other rider coaches, monitoring what's going on at a BRC, attending and being a participant in a BRC, and then having the trainer discuss it with them and coming back to the program manager for another interview, and then everybody getting together and talking about it so that they could compare notes on what the candidate said. Auditing was the only way through action that you could tell if people were going to be a good candidate, i.e., did they show up? Did they do the auditing? And did they stand around and just watch things, or did they participate? Were they out there throwing cones? Were they asking learner-centered questions for themselves to learn about what was going on, showing that they have an interest, or did they just stand there and spend time? So that gets to the volunteering thing down there at the bottom. And then the last thing that I haven't covered yet, the expectation management, having an information session with people and letting them know how difficult it is to be a candidate, to become a rider coach, what's going to be expected, what are the hours, and more importantly, the continued learning that goes on and on and on, rather than just being certified and coming to a standstill. Emotional intelligence here. And of note, and I've heard this a lot, and I know we've just discussed it a lot in Tribe Talk, motorcycle riding skills are not necessarily as important. Certainly they're desired, but they're not as important as being somebody with high emotional intelligence, being able to get along with others, being able to learn from and to translate that to others. So emotional intelligence, including empathy and being understanding, was a huge factor. So for that, there's this dude named Goleman who wrote a book. He's the guy that kind of coined the emotional intelligence definition and moniker. And these are the building blocks and competencies of emotional intelligence. And if I took you back a couple slides and showed you the slide that I had highlighted with the words, you would see all these things annotated in there. And by the way, these building blocks and competencies were discussed by both program managers and instructor trainers. It's something that was common throughout all discussions. So in the recommendations, the biggest thing was we need enhanced recruiting efforts, because if you don't recruit, your pool is going to be small. And the larger pool is important so that you can be more selective. If you have a small pool, you have to take what you have, which limits what kind of candidates you will have available to turn into rider coaches. Multiple interviews, multiple team members, discussed that a couple slides ago. More robust screening through auditing, meaning have people participate and show their interest and motivation before you allow them to go through a candidate prep. Because if they aren't motivated and inspired to do this before that, chances are it's not going to last that long. Comprehensive assessment of candidate EI is actually multiple interviews and being able to get different people's perspectives, scrub what everybody thinks to come up with a more accurate idea of who that person is for the group. And that is considered organizational fit. Documentation of this process. Anytime somebody is being onboarded, it's important that you take note of everything that's done and everything that they do, so that in the future, unfortunately, if you have the obligation of separating them from the organization, it's better. And then there's a couple different things we should probably try to see if we can measure whether this will work or not. And I suggest it will, just from research in human resource and organizational behavior research. But we should probably do some research running through these processes, documenting it, and finding the best ways to make candidates, not make them, but have candidates that will last longer and be more representative of the rider education community. Just a rehash of the rehash. Most importantly is probably the last bullet there. If we don't have good instructors, good rider coaches, then it impacts the quality of the student learning. And if it impacts the quality of the student learning, we run the risk of saying that, you know, why do we train them at all? So I firmly believe, and I've said this many times, that if you want to find out how positive rider education training is to students, take it away and you'll see crash rates go up. Rider education, going to the BRC, once again, is like going to kindergarten. We teach them the ABCs. We never get into word structure or grammar. We probably need to do more, has been discussed in many of the Tribe Talk happy hours. But if we don't do good when we take them into kindergarten and teach them the ABCs of writing, then we are definitely going to have problems later on. So let me unshare this real quick and open it up for discussion. Thanks for putting up with me for that long. Dan, I know your wheels are spinning there. You have any questions?
You're on mute, Dan.
Okay, now I'm muted.
No, we got you.
All right, thank you. I just said Don. Don always makes my head spin. He said my head was spinning. He could tell. So my head is always spinning, and Don makes it spin fast. So my curiosity, Don. You've shared this portion of your research previously. We've had discussions about it. So you may want to hold on to it until the end. But my curiosity is where you want to go next and what you think is the next best step.
I think the next best step is a pilot program to take all these recommendations and apply them. And if like we're stopped here. If I was going to take it further than that, I would like to do, I would like to monitor not only that program, but then take another program and just let them do what they do so I could have some comparison, preferably one that is less stringent on how they do candidates. If I had lots of money, I think that we could actually do a longitudinal study that monitors down the line. Because although it's been done before, I don't think it has. I think it's methodologically been insufficient in the past.
You cut out a little bit on that last thing, Don. Could you go back to what should be the longitudinal?
I think we should track BRC graduates longitudinally after they've taken the course to find out where they go and what happens. One of the problems in discussions with program administrators and people at NHTSA is we have this great big database in the sky, FARS, that tracks crashes. But correlating people that go through training to that FARS database to see if rider education is making an impact is very difficult. And I believe you were in one of the program administrator get-togethers where we talked about that with a particular state. You know, yeah, fatalities are easy to track or more easy to track. When you start talking about crash and severity of crash, it becomes next to impossible. So some method of having a state have a good candidate selection, monitor the BRCs, and then track them afterwards would be, you know, a start. Comments, Dan?
Yeah, there's multiple. We're talking multiple steps in there.
Yes.
So your initial research has to do with. We'd be saying, your research would be saying, if we do a better job at recruiting and selecting candidates that have the characteristics that we're talking about, emotional intelligence characteristics, that will improve student learning. They will be more efficient, more proficient instructors, therefore student learning will increase. So that's like step one.
Potentially. And
so,
and I will go back and I'll, you know, if you've reading the actual research, there's something that was said, you know, you could have, we talk a lot about instructors or coaches passing on appropriate knowledge to the students. And that's extremely important. That's why they're there, is to facilitate that learning. The opposite is not true. If you have a instructor or rider coach passing on inappropriate education during learning, you can have the opposite effect where people are more dangerous and it becomes more problematic. And this gets back to what I hear a lot about having that safety mindset. Do you, as a rider coach and instructor, have that safety mindset, or do you turn it off and on when you leave the course?
Yeah. I would say in the field of education, public education, we've had you know, a whole ton of suggestions as to how to improve student outcomes, how to improve public education. I mean, you can change the curriculum, you can reduce class size. I mean, those suggestions go on and on. I think if you narrow all those down and run them through a filter, the one that comes out is the quality of the instructor. And how do you, in education, we have to define what is good teaching. There aren't a lot of systems out there that define good teaching, but there are some. So if you improve the quality of the instruction that the student gets, that's the quickest and straightest path to improving the student outcome. It has less to do with the curriculum and less to do with time on task and less to do with the number of kids in the class and on and on and on. It has to do with who's the person at the front of the classroom and what kinds of characteristics does that person have, and do they have the characteristics that align with what a high quality teacher is. You're doing the same thing here in rider education. You're beginning to look at those same characteristics.
Correct. And what I will tell you is that even though I use the word emotional intelligence, or the words emotional intelligence in the research, what I'm really beginning to lean more towards, and this is what I said I would talk about earlier, is I think it is it's never one thing. It's a combination of many things. And in this particular time period, I'm looking more towards not only competence, how are you professionally, technically competent, but I'm looking for caring. Do you care for everybody that you're working with? And then lastly, character. What kind of character do you have? And that encompasses emotional intelligence. Did that come across? I know there was a lot of stuff. So competence, character, and caring, I think, includes emotional intelligence, professional, technical, and getting along with other people. So I'm relooking that.
So I talked a lot there. What are other people thinking?
It seems like it is always going to be difficult to control for adherence to curriculum across that spectrum, so that you're getting a good read on whether or not the person is more or less effective.
I would agree that one of our biggest challenges is having a single followable standard across the geographic space that we're covering.
The most fun part is trying to keep the add-ons or the additional stories or the history. I try not to express any personal stories when I'm teaching. I want to try and stay to the curriculum as best as possible. Now, if students have stories, I also let them go a little bit, but then I rein them back in. How can you apply that to the curriculum? or what we're talking about here, and try and make sure they come back to what they're there to learn.
That is being a good facilitator, if you know, if that's my perspective on that. And we all should be able to take those moments and include them as instructors. But if you don't come in with that ability, you either have to be highly motivated to learning how to do it and practice it until you get it, or we need to relook the people that we're inviting in. And it gets a lot to what we discussed last Wednesday on Happy Hour. You know, what does your 10,000 hours look like? What is that 10,000 hours in that makes you the proponent, the professional for what we do? Any good athlete, any person that does good in their job has that time, that motivation of making it all come together through experience. And if you don't have the motivation to put that kind of time into learning to be technically competent, proficient, to learn how to facilitate, then maybe there's something else that interests you more.
Dan, one of the things that you said was that what floats to the top is the person, and that curriculum isn't necessarily a critical factor. But I guess my curiosity then is there a difference between curriculum in terms of what happens in a classroom versus teaching a motor skill? So like, is someone that's a good facilitator in a classroom academic environment the same person as the person who's good at teaching a motor skill?
That's a good point, because I was also going to bring in the other thing we have to do is we have to read our students, because you'll have 3 different type of learners in the same class. So you have to identify those fairly early on and figure out what methods are going to be best for each of your different students.
I would wholeheartedly agree with what Carol just said, because when you teach a class, especially if it's your first class of the season, you're a little rusty from teaching. For those of us that live in the cold weather neighborhoods, you know, we don't start teaching back up again until March or April. But then when you do teach, you got to stay on path, try not to get on your soapbox at all, and keep the students engaged in the class, not only in the classroom, but help them along on the bikes when they're out there riding.
So what I will tell you is from the research, and this was multiple studies that I looked at, the one aspect that the researchers thought, and these come from around the world, was that much of rider education spends much too much time focusing on motor skill development, almost leaving out the most important part, which is behavioral. I believe that in my heart, that is the reason why all the updates have been made to the BRC, is because that's what research says, including my beginning research that I started in my literature review from Baldy Bear in 2005, expressed that wholeheartedly, that we don't spend enough time studying how the rider coaches affect the education, and we don't spend enough time talking about judgment and how the behavior of riding a motorcycle is more important than the actual motor skills. Everybody gets wrapped up in teaching the motor skills because that's what our mind tells us is most important. And I'm not saying that it's not important at all. It's part of a holistic way of learning, but it does no good if you know how to operate the controls, if you go out and don't operate them properly at the right time, because you're not thinking, not using good judgment, you're not using social, emotional behavior for being out on the road and you're acting like you're out on the track.
That's where one of my favorite questions comes in for the reflections. Where might you use this skill out in the real world when you're riding your own motorcycle?
It's there for a reason.
Yeah, well, we always have to do that. I think that's the most important thing. I mean, Don is talking about, you know, the judgment and decision making, and I certainly agree with him in terms of the relatively recent changes to the BRC. My study of the research would say that I know Don has a different opinion here. My study of the research would show that rider training, that we don't have any firm evidence that rider training impacts risk of crashing. The research is very mixed on that, and one of the reasons that could be given for that is that rider training certainly in the United States has this almost full focus on teaching operational skills, basic operational skills. And people don't crash because they don't have basic operational skills. Every person who crashes is out there on the street riding their motorcycle. They know how to start it, they know how to shift it, they know how to ride in a straight line, they know how to ride curves. They have all the basic operational skills. People crash their motorcycles because of judgment, perception, decision-making skills, lack of responsibility. You know, I can have the greatest skills in the world, but if I wheelie through an intersection in a school zone, that has nothing to do with my basic operational skills. It has to do with my judgment and decision-making. And the biggest thing in judgment and decision-making that shows up in fatality data is the number of people who choose not to have an endorsement, and that's just an irresponsible choice. It doesn't mean that having an endorsement reduces the risk of crash. It just says this person is saying screw you to the system, and they're also alcohol impaired, and if they're in a state that gives them a choice to ride without a helmet, they'll ride without a helmet. So there's three irresponsible decisions that ride along with fatal crashes. I choose not to wear a helmet, I choose not to get endorsed, and I choose to drink and ride. And none of that has to do with basic operational skills or even advanced operational skills. So I certainly agree with Don on that point. I'm not sure that we can combine enough of it in a single course. I'd almost, you know, for future that we would look at here's a course that teaches you basic operational skills. Go ahead and do that. The next course teaches you how to keep yourself alive, teaches responsibility, judgment, and decision making. We don't have systems that that encourage that kind of thing.
I wholeheartedly agree with your analysis there, Dan, and that gets to, once again, what we've talked at happy hour the last month or so with Duncan McCrae and the GDL and tiered licensing. So we're pretty much at the end of an hour. I'm going to go ahead and launch the Tribe Talk polling. 2 questions for you to mull over. I know you look forward to this as much as I enjoy doing it. So here you go. 2 questions. For those of you unable to see them or unable to answer them, I'm going to read them off real quick. The first question is, the BRC is primarily designed to, and you have a selection of 5 here. A, screen people who don't belong on a motorcycle. B, serve as an entry point for the advanced rider course and future MSF rider courses. C, Present the knowledge, skills, and attitudes necessary for safe, responsible motorcycling. D, provide the skills for a lifetime of safe and enjoyable motorcycle operation. Or E, lay the foundation for a lifetime of successful motorcycling. The second question, the action steps on the range cards are A, must be followed, or a rider coach is in violation of their signed rules of professional conduct. B, provide a sequence for conducting the standard version of the basic rider course. C, are to be read verbatim when conducting a course for novice riders, but may be paraphrased for a group of experienced riders. D, are designed solely for rider coach trainers to use during quality assurance visits. And E, are to be committed to memory by rider coach candidates so they can properly conduct their peer teaching assignments and student teaching assignments. We're at about 43%. I'll give it some more time.
Hey, Don, while people are pondering that, do you mind if I ask a question, having been late to the session tonight?
Sure.
Listening to, was it Dan, talk about mechanics and behavioral, the question comes to mind in licensing. Does any state require as part of their licensing any sort of behavioral aspect, or is it all mechanics? Go out, do the road test, you pass.
I will answer your question with a question. Have you read any of the NHTSA documents on what they require in rider education courses?
No, I have not, other than what's been presented in Tribe Talk or Happy Hour.
Okay, so I would recommend you do that and you'll find the answer.
Okay.
It's a curriculum, more of a curriculum-based thing. And once again, states are different.
So there are actually states that evaluate behavioral aspects in licensing a motorcyclist?
When you read it, you'll understand it. And they're recommendations, by the way. We're at 86%.
Which goes back to my question. Is it done in practice? Does any state do it in practice? I understand there's recommendations. Does any state do it in practice?
This Mike?
I'll share a thought.
Yeah, go ahead.
In order to navigate through this social world that we live in, isn't that in and of itself an evaluation of your attitudes and behavior?
The only way I can answer that is to say that I've never actually done a DMV road test. So what I understand is if you can go do a figure eight, do a U-turn, do whatever on a motorcycle, so be it. At no point does an evaluator sit with you, ask you questions towards your attitude, beliefs, so forth and so on, or even looking at your driving record, as far as I'm aware.
Can you measure someone's behavior by having a discussion?
Perhaps not behavior, but mindset, I would agree, yes, you can.
Not just one. I mean, that's the whole reason in the discussions with the information I put out today. If you have just one interview, you're very likely going to get exactly what you want to hear, because they're going to tell you at least what they think you want to hear. But through multiple interviews, you can really start to understand a person. So I don't think any licensure system is that articulate at this point.
Fair enough.
Mike, I've looked at a lot of those. If you find a state that has an evaluation of the rider for licensing purposes that has something other than demonstrate basic skills, tell me about it. I haven't found one.
Which really goes to answering my question. Thank you.
Just a
Minimal
thought,
standard.
but an interview is very subjective.
True.
It's okay to be subjective when choosing to send somebody to a RCP or an IP. It's not okay when you're talking about issuing a license. Being subjective would be a real problem.
Agreed. All right, so I'm going to end polling and share results. We got about 86% here that voted. Thank you for those who were able to do it. And I hope I just didn't lock up my system. I'll give it a second here. Don't that just figure? Here we go.
Don, it's interesting to see that the average distance between the participants and their cameras has significantly decreased as they anticipate your results.
That's what we call leaning in.
So that's what we call, I've already taken my contacts out for the day.
All right. So for some reason, it's not responding. I will tell you that the answer for the BRC is primarily designed to is E, lay the foundation for a lifetime of successful motorcycling, with 46% of the answers. The second runner-up, which was wrong, at 54%, was present the knowledge, skills, and attitudes necessary for safe, responsible motorcycling. So it's laying the foundation. That is it. And that goes a lot to what, was talked about by Dan and others about, tiered and graduated licensing. It takes more than just going to kindergarten. Number two, the action steps on the range cards. The correct answer at 92%, thank you, everybody, was to provide a sequence for conducting the standard version of the basic rider course. 8% answered must be followed or a rider coach is in violation of assigned rules for professional conduct. So thank you all for taking that. Kind of fun. I enjoy it. I hope you do too. Let me get a...
Thanks, Don. Good night, everybody.
I'm gonna quick hit this because I think it's important. See if it'll let me do it. Yeah, everything's going to hell. All right, so as I leave, remember we're still trying to build the tribe. The next tribe talk will be the 29th of November, which is the Sunday after Thanksgiving weekend. Hopefully you'll be home and be able to participate. Remember VRETS Tuesday night at 8 p.m. Eastern time. And if I haven't told you tonight, I love you all for what you do. Please be a mentor to somebody or find somebody to mentor you, because that's how we get better. And I want you all to have a good night. Take care.
Good night.
Hey, Don.
Night. Good night, Don.
Night,
Thanks.
Don.
Good night, everyone.
Night, everybody.